very rarely do things go perfectly on your first try at something new. That's just a fundamental fact about life in general. But when writing for film and television, it'll almost never go exactly as it was intended. After all, filmmaking is a creative outlet, and on most occasions, people tend to have second thoughts about what they're going to put in or what they want to take out of their work. Keeping that in mind, to ensure that the project is the best that it can be, writers go through different drafts of the story's outline, as a way of changing their mistakes before they actually make them happen and put them on the big screen. So, how does this process work? How do you write another draft? Well, to do that, we first need to work through your first draft. So picture this scenario. You've just finished your screenplay. You're exhausted from all the late nights of writing and thinking of ideas. You've pushed your imagination to its absolute limits. Your brain is fried, and you as a person are completely burnt out. But it's okay, because you finally finished your screenplay. Now, the next step for you is to read the entire thing, take notes, and rewrite it. Over and over and over again. Welcome to writing a screenplay. But one thing that I struggled with when growing as a writer was actually that very concept, writing another draft. I mean, what constitutes writing another draft of a story that you're already pretty proud of? Well, many things actually. Honestly, it could be something as major as inconsistent plot points, or even something as minor as grammatical errors. Any mistake, no matter how small, mind you, has to be fixed by the time you reach the final draft. But for now, let's focus on what constitutes a change within the first draft of your story. To understand what requires change in your script, you have to think about what story it is that you're trying to tell. For example, if you're writing a horror story that takes place in the 1800s, and then all of a sudden you include time-traveling monkeys, something's probably wrong there. Even if your ideas are good, they may still not belong in your story. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. But nevertheless, it's just something that writers have to accept. But don't think you have to throw away that idea completely, however. If you think there's some potential in an idea you have that may not work on your current project, then you can just save it for another one. Just because it doesn't work right now doesn't mean that it's not going to work later on. But if you really want to keep that idea in there, then an alternative I can provide you with is that you play around with the idea, but try to adjust it so that it still has the same effect you want it to have, whilst also making sense in the story. Most of the time, that's easier said than done, so don't think it's going to be a walk in the park. But in some cases, there are ideas that, no matter how much you like, they just simply don't work in the story, no matter how you want to adjust it. Nor should they, in all honesty. The more ideas you use, the less material you'll have for the project later on, or maybe even a later project altogether, resulting in writer's block. It's your best ideas that have to be inserted into the story, and what makes those specific ideas the best is that they fit the best within the context of the story. And sometimes we don't see it, but even the most creative ideas are susceptible to being the very downfall of your film. Writing the second draft of your screenplay is a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, on one hand, you now know and understand where you messed up last time, so simply erasing all the mistakes that you previously made is now the easiest part. But this is filmmaking, so things aren't going to be easy for very long. Now that you know what you have to get rid of, it's just a matter of what's going to take that empty space. Fortunately for you, there are things in the screenplay that you probably didn't take out, which is good, because now you have something to work off of. This is a key aspect of your second draft because it ensures that you're not starting from scratch, but you're also not completely done either. Even if it's minuscule, there's always some kind of foundation to work off of. One thing that I like to do when I take things out is to fill the empty space with extensions of my favorite ideas. If I have an idea that I really like, I'll incorporate that further into my story, provided it doesn't feel like it's being stretched too thin. And as I've said before, that's something that your audience will inevitably notice. But when it comes to filling in the missing space, it's not a bad choice to continue with another idea that you know you can't get rid of for the sake of the story. But as I said before, you can't stretch it too thin. The problem with having really good ideas is that sometimes we feel almost compelled to make them the focal point of the story, when in actuality, it might not really be as relevant as we may think. No matter how good your idea is, if used too much, your audience is going to feel overwhelmed. This is because when done aggressively, it undermines the audience's intelligence, and they'll know it right away. That's why your ideas need to be done in a subtle manner. This way, the audience knows you are acknowledging that you don't need to hold their hands through this entire experience. I love writing. Writing is something that I do every day. It's something that I didn't think I would be particularly good at first, but with practice and criticism from others, I got better and better over time. Now I can't stop writing. It's something that I've made a part of my routine, and it's not something I do solely behind a computer screen. I'm brainstorming all day, every day, and to me, that's a form of writing. And I'm doing it all the time. And typing it on a computer is just my brain making it into physical words that I can read. But it's all up here. And when it comes to ideas, there's a lot going up here all the time. And while it's something that has helped me in the past, it's also something that holds a lot of writers back, myself included. The reason being is that with 1,000,001 different ideas, which ones are we supposed to choose? Writers get so immersed in their own work that oftentimes they'll get ahead of themselves. So to prevent the stories we know and love from being a convoluted mess, the writers will have editors and assistants help out in putting the work into its best possible shape. Many legendary authors like Stephen King, the author of The Shining, and Eiichiro Oda, the author of One Piece, have even stated that they need editors and assistants when writing, because oftentimes they get ahead of themselves. Which only goes to show that being the writer does not put you above making a bad move for your story, even when you have the best intentions for it. It's important to be open-minded when an editor or someone you have a personal relationship with critiques your work. As a writer, you sort of have to be open to criticism. Doing anything in a creative outlet, especially one like filmmaking, will always be followed by someone's negative or positive criticism. After all, you're making something knowing that other people are going to see and criticize. Some people will give negative critiques about your work simply for a reaction, that's just how a lot of audiences are, but others will say something negative out of having a legitimate concern. Which is why if you want a team of editors, you need to make sure that it's comprised of people who understand storytelling and want the best outcome for your work. That's why they're there after all. And in the likely scenario that you don't currently have immediate access to a team of professional writers, then don't be afraid to ask for criticism from friends and family. Just because writing's not their profession doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about. Listening to other people's ideas can be important, so don't be afraid to listen. The most important thing to keep in mind when writing your first draft is to understand that no matter how careful you are, you will make a mistake in some form or another. But the hardest pill to swallow in all of this is that you will make mistakes repeatedly. Very rarely, if ever, do writers make something that they would never change. Hindsight is 20/20. Sometimes we find things that maybe didn't work so well as much as we thought it would, things that maybe could have been done better, or even brand new ideas that we just never got to implement because it was too late by the time we thought of it. One of my favorite films of all time, Blade Runner, had released 6 different versions of the same film before Ridley Scott was finally able to make the film look exactly like he wanted to make it, in the form of the film's 7th version, Blade Runner: The Final Cut. Mind you, it took him 35 years to make what is considered to be the definitive version of his film. Almost the same case with Justice League. Zack Snyder, the director, stepped away from the film and it was taken over by Joss Whedon, who essentially rewrote the entire film and reshot it before it was set to release, resulting in a completely different movie. A few years later, Zack Snyder came back and finished his version of the film, and it was twice as long as Whedon's version, resulting once again in a completely different movie. It is a writer's nature to second-guess everything they do because the imagination is limitless. There's simply no bounds for what a writer's mind can put on paper, but it's important that what you put on that paper is your best work, even if there's a chance that you may not like it later. which is typically the case, but that's all a part of the process. So it's your job to trust the process and trust yourself.